Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's edition of Fake Accents Unite. Almost forgot the name of my own show there. I'm joined, as always, by the Britisher. Good evening, Sam.
Good evening. My God, was that a way of starting?
Oh.
You sounded like some American television show host.
Wow! Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's edition of Fake Accents Unite. Oh no, that's more like an auctioneer.
Along those lines, yes.
Rapidly, that sort of thing. I have adjusted the audio levels, so I'm really hoping that I'm not twice as loud as you are this week. I'm also really hoping that everyone can hear what you're saying from the audio perspective, and that we don't have a travesty as we did last week. But what can you do?
Why? What made things a travesty last week that I didn't know about?
Oh, you did know because we got introduced, or I introduced everyone.
Oh, yes, now I know what you mean. Yes, I had my rant, and then nobody actually heard it. Yes.
I can see in the audience the usual cast of characters. I can see Sutsko and Harry Ann Gleave. I can see laconic Dr. Martin Luther Pepe. Lovely to see you all. And I think we will be joined by a tailed feature, hopefully in about half an hour, but we will see.
He's going to come and brag about his Tunnocks tea cakes he gets for giving blood. Spoilt swine.
I thought that his blood went into Tunnocks tea cakes. Isn't that the nice syrupy red layer at the bottom there? Obviously Buckfast thickened it up a little bit. I want to start the stream off with a super chat that got missed in the last stream at the end, unfortunately. But it does tie in nicely to what we're going to be talking about today. And it says, given the option, would you rather abolish the BBC or attempt to reform it? And that's from Mr. Twisted Frenzy, who I hope tunes in at some point and realizes we have answered his question. I would not abolish the BBC, personally. I think it has a good history. But what I would do is make it compete, seeing as that it has gone against the very tenets of its formation to attempt to be impartial, and also to produce new and interesting content which other broadcasters would not produce because of the financial considerations, whereas now it just seems to be churning out a mixture of propaganda and pap. Would you agree, Britisher?
Well, I mean, abolishing it is that is the step of effectively censoring, of kind of getting rid of something, of basically saying, well, you are no longer permitted to do something. Whereas if you just withdraw their license fee, then they have to, as you say, they have to compete.
Indeed.
And I think we're very much looking at sort of that. I think even in the BBC, they don't believe that their charter is necessarily going to be renewed when it comes up again.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they've only just had it renewed about a year ago or something like that. And there were some very pointed questions asked at the time.
Well, I remember there was certainly they came under fire as well recently, wasn't it, for attempting to charge pensioners who had been offered free licenses for their license.
But yeah, when it came to sort of questions in in sort of parliamentary committees or whatever, because obviously the BBC needed to kind of answer to these committees because it was a matter of the government, or Parliament, reissuing this charter to the BBC, that they've kind of got this monopoly, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And therefore there was some politicians that kind of asked a few frank questions, as in, of your top programs, I'm looking at this, and pretty much, all of them seem to be 10 years old or older. And so I think 7 of them are 20 years old or older, the formats.
Yes, the BBC is entirely trading on its rather colourful history of
and they kind of they were kind of putting it to them. I mean, you're trying to tell us here how innovative you are and how how influential and this and whatever, but what have you actually done in the last 2 or 3 years that would in any way be memorable?
Let's not and not to mention who are the names who come up, who are the big movers on the BBC. You had obviously Stephen Fry, you had David Attenborough, even not Richard Attenborough. You have you obviously had people like Rowan Atkinson, Hugh Laurie. We could go on, but who today?
Yes, they're all of a certain vintage, aren't they?
Who is an actor of note or a presenter of note? Who's the Tony Robinson of today?
Well, I mean, it's quite simple. If you want to have another Rowan Atkinson, if you want to have a Stephen Fry, if you want to have any people like that, then there needs to be a vehicle that makes them prominent.
The only vehicle that they...
The simple fact is they don't have any new vehicles they're introducing.
No, and the vehicles that they did have, who were kind of keeping them afloat, and I am thinking of people like Clarkson here, are gone. So
yes, yeah, I think right now they've pretty much got what is it? The Antiques Roadshow, I think, is just about one of the only things. I know the Great British Bake Off is always hailed as some sort of great success, albeit that I have never understood why. I mean, make a cookery program without any recipes. That's a really it's just something that just astonishes me.
Well, I'll be curious to see. Basically, I'd be curious to see the viewing figures for Bake Off and why they are, how they compare to programs past, shall we say?
Mm-hmm. We do have to. I'm not even talking about viewing figures within this country because. Yep. You see, if you make something for the BBC and then you stick it on television, it's been broadcast. You can stick it in a can and stick it somewhere in the archive and forget about it. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to actually commercially making some money, it very much depends on what the rest of the world watches. Because the thing I always like to compare it to is think about Bulgarian television. Now, they will have a national broadcaster, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. And they will have more than likely, they will make their own Bulgarian soap opera. And they will have their own Bulgarian news program. And they will have a Bulgarian evening light entertainment program.
And I'm sure we can all agree, without having watched any of it, that all of it is miles above any Italian soap opera.
Yes, of course. But when it comes to anybody else wanting to watch the Bulgarian soap opera, I think there will be zero takers.
Yes.
Now, when it comes to the BBC, the thing that set them sort of head and shoulders above all the other broadcasters was their ability to make stuff that was of international quality. Yes. Stuff that others wanted to watch. So, the Australian broadcasters would pay for the right to broadcast it. It would be on American television. It would be on Irish television. On the continent, one would dub it into their languages, and they would broadcast it. So it would be seen all over the place, and all those broadcasters would pay for the royalties. Yeah. The right to show it. They would pay the BBC. The BBC would be making money. I think Top Gear alone is supposed to have financed BBC Radio 5.
Yeah.
So the £50 million a year that Top Gear made in profit just from the international rights financed that side of things. And whenever they're kind of talking about, we don't have any money, we need to raise the license fee, we don't have any money, we need to do this, we can't have the elderly watching for free, we don't have any money, you just always think, make something that people want to see.
Yeah, and
you will have money very quickly.
And it was kind of something that you need something that transcends the political, because the only noteworthy thing I would say that I've seen come out of the BBC of late, I don't know quite when it was aired, were of all things 2 shorts from BBC 3, I think it was, where they took the mick out of Ramonas, they took the mick out of millennials, and they basically weren't afraid to do humour that cut both ways, which was interesting. But they were hidden away, and then they were broadcast, and I only resurfaced on Twitter recently, which was interesting in and of itself.
It's one of those things where they can say they've done it, but they deliberately didn't show anyone. It's a bit like when they report on something, but it's not on the television, it's not on the radio, but it's on some web page that never features on their actual front news webpage.
BBC World News Nigeria.
Yeah, I mean, you find it by Googling it, but it's never actually on their news page. It was never mentioned on BBC News on television, and it was never mentioned on the radio. So they can say they reported on it, and they will have a historical record they can point to of saying, oh, well, no, of course we covered that.
Yeah.
Except, of course, we all know they didn't.
Yeah. If you tuck something away, not to mention, because it's not even reporting by omission, right, or a lack of reporting. It's, tuck it away where you know no one's going to find it.
Yes.
I like that we moved from should we abolish the BBC to has it produced anything good? And in the chat, people are still saying the BBC are traitors to the British people. They should be defunded and then utterly destroyed.
Well, as I say, I mean, this sounds very much like the attack hamsters talking, doesn't it? I say just basically refuse them their license fee, or just be absolutely brutal and just say, okay, fine, we're cutting it in half.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. This is the thing: is that the license fee is more expensive than any streaming service that currently is on the market. It's not a competitive model. Whereas before it was like, oh, you don't get ads if you get our programming. And everyone gets access to sort of this suite of channels for it. Now you have dozens of American competitors for a start, but also the European variants, Sky and all sorts, which are cheaper than the license fee. And there is no reason why you would choose...
I mean, in all fairness, the BBC as such is quite an expensive thing to run.
Which is surprising, given that it underpays its top presenters under the market rate. For what they're worth. I mean,
for example, they have got local radio stations all over the place.
Yes.
So if you suddenly, as someone who has been flooded, if you are suddenly caught up in a natural disaster, you will suddenly find a great interest in turning on BBC Radio to find out what's going on. So they do fulfill a function, if you know what I mean. Now, I know people will say, well, there's no reason why the private local radio stations can't do that and whatever. But yes, then suddenly Auntie Beeb does seem to have a value. However, yes.
Does that outweigh the detriments?
Yes, as it is operating right now, which is clearly deeply, deeply political. And they would, I mean, we always... they have that terrible program these days, don't they, on the news channel, in which you can complain about their coverage of a news story. And I have to this day ever to hear them admit, okay, yeah, we might have got that one wrong.
Yeah.
It's every single time, oh, no, we think we actually covered that quite properly.
The Trudeau response, yes.
Yeah, and they've always got, how shall we say, if they're accused of bias, they always only look at it through the party political lens. Have we favoured one party over the other? Rather than have we actually favoured a type of view, a world view over the other?
I just have to ask, just to interrupt. When you had your flood, did you have to climb onto your fence?
No.
I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. Right. Well, I think we're fairly stolid then in our...
Well, there is one thing which is actually related that I covered in the week that was.
Oh, go on.
And that is the BAFTAs. The BAFTAs made an announcement last week. Of course, with the news being a bit crazy these days, things like that almost get completely overlooked. They get forgotten. But the BAFTAs made an announcement, and this is the television BAFTAs. For the Americans out there, we have this thing called the BAFTAs over here that seems to try to be an award ceremony for cinema films, but also at the same time an award ceremony for television programs. A few years ago, we separated them because they began to realize that Tom Cruise didn't want to turn up to watch Coronation Street get an award. But yes, the television BAFTAs have now announced that henceforth, to be nominated for a BAFTA, your programs will need to need to meet diversity targets. Isn't that wonderful?
Yes.
And you see, what kind of occurs to me is, on the face of it, you look at it, and the first thing you sort of think, oh Christ, not more of this diversity malarkey. But then actually, when you think of it, you sort of think, well, how many conservatives? So if you are a conservative and you are in the media, I know they're a rare breed, but let's assume you are. Are you going to be one of the people who actually matches all these diversity targets? So, is that not really a way of saying, in order to be nominated, you have to be progressive?
Yeah.
So, in order, if you then kind of, with your sort of parallel ruler, you do your slide ruler thing, and you sort of go back in history, and you sort of think, okay, fine, in the Soviet Union, how many people who were known not to be of the admissible political view would get a television award?
Mm.
How many people in North Korea would get it today?
Yeah.
And here we have, this is not state enforced, but it's nonetheless, it's the same thing. If you are not of the correct view, you won't even get nominated.
Yeah. I mean, you have to look at BBC comedy for that sort of thing. I mean, unless you're Nish Kumar, you're not getting on.
Yeah.
What was I going to reference? I can't remember which one it was. I think it might have been a music awards where they said, you may remember this, Britisher. Which award ceremony decided that they were going to remove the categories for men and women?
No, this doesn't ring a bell.
I cannot remember, but I can't remember. I think it was a music awards, and they said, we are proud to announce that we are removing gendered categories for whatever award this is. And then the next line was, and I'm really proud that we have 75% women in the next category. It was just like nominees, that sort of thing. And it's just like, really? Especially in media and entertainment, where you're not exactly you're not exactly floundering now, are you? But I want to. I think we're fairly solid in our estimation then that we wouldn't necessarily abolish the BBC, but we would certainly abolish the license fee. And
yes, I mean, it wouldn't have been too long ago that I would have still been hopeful, and I would have thought, it should be reformed.
Mm-hmm. Much like me in the European Union in 2015.
But from what I've seen, I'm not sure it can be.
Yeah.
And I did a video which was rather dry and very statistical, and a few people sort of asked me, what the hell are you trying to prove? You're just playing around with numbers. In which I kind of showed how these diversity targets they were setting, if you actually look at the biases within those particular groups, you would actually realize that they have assured a more left-leaning, a more left-leaning staff by doing this. They've kind of almost institutionalized it.
Mm.
And you look at it and you just, you can't help but sort of wonder, how on earth would you ever reform something like this? And I honestly don't, unless there is a sort of real government, an overt government intention that sort of, someone like Boris Johnson or whatever would say, okay, fine, we've now won the election, and now one of the things we're going to do is we're going to change the BBC. First thing, everybody in the board, out. The chief executive, out. Chuck them all out and put new people in. Now, the thing is, how willing would the British government be willing to do that?
Absolutely zero, because all they'll say is you're putting Tory stooges in the BBC and removing the storied impartiality that the BBC is famous for. Yeah.
Yes, and everybody would forget that that's pretty much what Tony Blair did.
Yeah.
Because that of course, happened with the dodgy dossier affair. That there was a report, I think, some broadcast on BBC 4 at 6 o'clock in the morning or something like that.
Mm.
And it referred to the fact that the British government had doctored the official dossier that was being presented to Parliament as proof that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah. Oh, what an interesting
thing,
time slot that was. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So it never got repeated again. But the reporter who actually, did the piece, he got fired.
Right.
The chief executive of the BBC got fired. The chairman of the board of the BBC got fired. They were all gone. The entire BBC was beheaded, and the journalist who was responsible for the broadcast was made an example of. And that same evening, Alistair Campbell, the press secretary, then gave an interview to Newsnight. And we all know what ferocious a character Jeremy Paxman was.
Yes.
He's still going, but he was then still on Newsnight. And clearly he had been told, be nice.
Yeah, because it was incredibly mild.
The entire institution has just pretty much been publicly castrated. Now, whatever you do, don't give this man a hard time, or it's going to get worse.
God.
Yes, he gave him the easiest ride anybody had ever seen, and he basically just came out to give the
party line
official view, as in, this is what everybody is to think about Iraqi, weapons of mass destruction, and the BBC now agree with us, don't they?
Scary.
Yes, Mr. Campbell.
Yes, Mr. Campbell. No, Mr. Campbell. 3 bags full, Mr. Campbell. Right. I think we'll move on from the BBC, because I'm sure we could go on talking about it forever. I do want to chime in with Sitscoen has donated $10. Thank you ever so much, sir, and says, "Greetings, gentlemen. The clock is 8:32:31 GMT, and it's raid o'clock in Lindisfarne and 21:32:31 in Bern, Brussels times."
It is indeed, but that was the time when he actually wrote that. But was that the time when we came online?
That was. He always waits. This is his whole thing. This is. I don't know whether or not.
You see, I was hoping that for once we'd beaten him.
We beat him once or twice. I beat him once by just not running Fake Accents Unite for 1 week. I wasn't actually terribly ill. You didn't have the flu. We were simply, just trying to beat the Danes. It didn't work, of course. He just claimed that we were 126,000 seconds late the week later. But what can you do?
Well, yes, yeah. It's strange, isn't it? I mean, the Vikings never really, they don't strike you as sort of historical figures, as particularly pedantic characters. You would more think it was kind of the Germans living in the Schwarzwald who invented the cuckoo clock or something like that, who would be, you are 23 seconds late. What have you to say for yourself?
I mean, he is an engineer of sorts, so I guess it may have bled over.
I still don't know. I think, Sutskoen, we have to question your Danishness.
You must prove to us by sending a pound of bacon to my PO box that will be verified as good quality.
I suspect there is some German accountant blood in there somewhere.
Oh, God.
You do know that right now he's sitting there going, your name will also go on the list.
I imagine so. So the big news today, the Queen made a speech. Did you tune in?
I didn't tune in. No. I saw some of it on the news. I have to agree to a certain extent with Jeremy Corbyn. I know this is, everybody can hear the needle scratch off the record. Yeah, but he sort of said that this, he kind of, I don't know what phrasing he used, but yeah, he sort of said, that this is a bit of a farce, so to speak.
Yes, he said there has never been such a farce of a government with a majority of -45 and a 100% record of defeat in the House of Commons, setting out a legislative agenda they know cannot be delivered.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to whole prorogation of Parliament and whatever, I was quite clear they had every right to do it. I still, to this day, say that the Supreme Court, disappeared up its own backside in that particular ruling. But we all know, really, that this is just part of the political manoeuvres.
Mm.
The idea that a government that is calling for a general election and doesn't have a majority shouldn't then do a Queen's speech and start saying this is our policy, this is our political program, this is what we seek to deliver.
Well,
and you just go, how?
Yeah. Well,
with who? With what army?
Here's an interesting thing. So Laura Kuenssberg is basically looking down the shopping list, as it were, and she was saying, in many ways, it's a Queen's speech for a parallel universe, one in which Boris Johnson gets his way, where he definitely gets his deal by the end of the week. It definitely gets through Parliament on Saturday. Definitely all the Brexit legislation gets passed. He definitely gets the general election he wants in the next few weeks. Definitely gets a majority. So it's
well, I would put it thus. It was the first Tory manifesto read by the Queen.
Yes. So the Guardian, of all papers, has actually done a breakdown called "How Unusual Was the Language of Johnson's First Queen's Speech," and they basically tie back to the last 100 years of King and Queen speeches, and look at them, and they've done some actually decent work, probably because they're not injecting any opinion in there. So you've got all the usual stuff. Oh, climate change has been mentioned since 2000, etc. But there's some interesting ones in there. So things like, whilst she said, "My government is committed to addressing violent crime. New sentencing laws will see that the most serious offenders spend longer in custody. Measures will be introduced to improve the justice system's response to foreign national offenders." And although foreign policy is understandably referenced in many speeches, discussion of foreign individuals is rare, all things considered. She also is supposed to be, or traditionally is, more emotionally neutral, and this is actually the first use of the word pain in 100 years in a section that also discusses violence and victims. So it's a much more pointed speech, shall we say?
Well, put it like this. This is what I mean with it's the Tory manifesto. The Tories always pride themselves on being the party of law and order.
Yeah.
And here is a party thinking that it's only really weeks away from a general election, and it wants to do a bit of tub thumping.
Yeah.
I mean, is really the way foreign nationals are dealt with in the justice system a pressing matter on everybody's lips?
No.
There
is only one issue on everybody's lips.
Yes, it's one of those things that there was this wonderful example once in Yes Minister in the last episode, the one as he's becoming Prime Minister, in which he kind of goes about saying there's this massive problem with the Euro sausage. It's a tricky problem. I really don't see how we can possibly solve it. What was it? It was the Europeans were insisting that it be referred to as a homogenized offal tube or something like that.
Right.
And Bernard kind of points out to him, "Minister, you are aware that is not actually what the European Union is." Shut up, Bernard. And he kind of explains to him, "You don't seem to understand. Yes, we've had a word with the Europeans. We've sorted it out. They will allow us to call it the British sausage or something like that."
Oh, yes, that's right. Yes.
It's all fine and well. But that's not what the public wants to hear. The public doesn't want to be given a solution to a problem they didn't know they had. What they want to hear is they want to have a problem. Yes. And then when the big problem arises, then they want to hear the solution.
Yes.
So it's one of these things that, yes, I can well imagine we will hear Tory politicians, particularly that Priti Patel, telling us all how we're about to be knifed by foreigners. But thank God the Tory manifesto includes something about foreigners and how they're going to be dealt with in prisons. It's that sort of thing. This is pure electioneering stuff, in reality, there is really only one subject that matters.
Yes.
And it is Brexit.
A couple of people, are just asking why there's been a Queen's speech. It's because the Parliament was re-prorogued for a brief period of time. That's all it is.
Yeah. He basically prorogued the end bit of the actual prorogation he had proposed.
It was something like a week, wasn't it? Or 4 days or something?
Oh, something like that. So instead of taking 10 days off, it got 4 days off at the end or something like that. It was ridiculous. I mean, we all saw the kind of, that sort of great symbolic moment when John Bercow recalled everybody to Parliament. And it was like Prime Minister's question time, for a day or two. And they were all packed in the chamber and they were all issuing their protests. And we had weeping female MPs telling us how they were getting nasty tweets by the public. And then suddenly there was nobody there. For the rest of the time that were actually there, there was about, a dozen people in the parliamentary chamber? The whole talk about, we need to have this prorogation overturned because we need to hold the government to account. They are trying to steal this away from Parliament. They are trying to undermine parliamentary sovereignty, and this is about declaring a tyranny and whatsoever.
Oh, a long weekend.
And when Parliament was back, what did they do? Nothing.
They did nothing for a week, and then they said, "Do you know what? Let's go off anyway."
all this time that was so desperately needed in Parliament turned out to be, as was to be expected, a complete sham. Yes.
Yes, and
mind you, can I just add, if there is one thing that I would really like to see done when it comes to politics, and I am fully prepared to be completely disappointed.
Go on.
So it is not just Brexit that is required. And I think if you would ask most people of the public, and this is more than likely one of those things that people won't be asked in polls and things, if there is one thing I think people would like to see done is our constitution should be overhauled. Because right now it's a complete mess.
Yes,
I mean, we're kind of stumbling from crisis where nobody quite knows what the Constitution actually means in this case to the next crisis where nobody really knows what the Constitution means. Now we've even got the Scottish Court of Session effectively reserving itself the right to send the letter requesting an extension of EU membership if Boris Johnson doesn't do it.
Yeah. I'm sorry, does anybody really believe that the Scottish High Court has that power? No, but of course they've got to make a show of it, haven't they? This is why I get very irritated, because these kinds of headlines, because the Scottish Court can determine whatever it wants to determine, right? When it does so, you have to look out for the headline, where the worst one is when it says, "A British court has ruled." And you have to go into the thing, and then it goes, the High Court in Scotland, and you go, what did they don't influence anything down south, shall we say, in the same way.
Well, yes, but it kind of shows the mess. That I mean, in any constitution where the powers would be properly delineated, there would never be a question about this. The Scottish Court of Session would just simply say, "This is none of our business, go away."
So you've got two options there, haven't you? You've either got devolve all the powers to Scotland, let them become their own autonomous nation, and it's a slightly strange state of affairs, or you remove all of the devolved powers from Scotland, and you get the same problem as with the north of England, where they complain that Westminster doesn't understand them.
Yes, yeah. No, it's a mess. It's a complete and utter mess.
I think
when it came to the High Court decision regarding prorogation, again, that was a complete and utter mess. And to my mind, this needs clearing up. That once this is done, given these cracks that have been laid bare, where it's just blatantly obvious that things aren't running properly, these things will need to be sorted out, so that if something like this arises again in future, we don't end up in such a constitutional knot
Do you not see us being, however, do you not see it being better, shall we say, to return to the roots of, the 1689 Bill of Rights and the Magna Carta and that sort of thing, and going, actually, we need to return to our constitutional roots as opposed to, a new wave of reform, because knowing what we know about politicians of today, that constitution is not going to look anything like the one we want.
That would just be another way of solving it. So, do you understand what I mean? I mean, if you have to, enter reforms into the system as it is now, or if you just change it back to where it was because you think that is going to work, then again, that is just a different solution. But we need a solution.
We do.
Because, I mean, at the moment, this is just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, if you take the Americans, they know which way things are going to pan out. If a crisis emerges in politics or whatever, or if there's a clash in the courts or whatever, you see the Americans have these bored expressions on their faces and go, oh, well, yeah, it's just going to go to the Supreme Court. But at least they know how it's going to happen. They know what the outcome, they may not know what the Supreme Court may decide or whatever, but they know the process.
Abolish the Supreme Court. That's what needs to be done.
Here in Britain, nobody seems to be able to foretell the process. I mean, nobody expected the Scottish Court of Session to play any role in this. So it's this sort of complete mess where there has to be delineations. So even if you go back, as you say, to old laws prior to the introduction of the Supreme Court, and you go back to the law lords and things like that, okay, fine. But again, you will need to put it down in black and white, as in, this authority is in charge of that, and that authority is in charge of this, and these,
and
no one can cross any lines.
Up with it, I will not put.
No one is entitled to just give themselves the power to do something.
Yes, no great grabs here and there. Up with it, we shall not put. The hopefully, I can see Tailed Feature is in the chat. He'll be in here in a second. I assume he's in the server. One would hope so. Right. A couple of super chats have come in. Drug Shovel says, hello from the States. You're my at-work entertainment. Hope you're both well. Are you well, Britisher?
Actually, I am surprisingly well.
Like,
I can't say I'm 100%. That would be too boring. I have to moan about something. I still seem to have this curse of the sinuses. But I noticed just yesterday was the first time, when you're sort of going up a staircase and you you jog up the staircase as opposed to sort of leaden-footedly clumping up the staircase. And it was kind of yesterday when I suddenly detected that I seem to just have a little more bounce to me. So I might slowly, even though I've still got this thing, be kind of returning back from the dead.
I'm sorry, Britisher, but you cannot say that simply having a nasal voice is your condition.
You see, the problem is not that it's a nasal voice. The problem is that for anybody who is familiar with the wonderfully comforting phenomenon of the post-nasal drip. So if you have got some kind of infection up in your sinuses,
I can't believe how quickly we are losing viewers.
Yes, the nose doesn't run, how shall we say, in a sort of traditional forward direction, but instead in a backward direction, and therefore it goes down your throat.
Gross.
And yes, it's not very pleasant. It ends up in your constantly trying to clear your throat, which at the same time makes it rather sore. And yes, at times I feel as though I'm breathing in petrol. It's really such a bizarre. Yes.
Well, I hope you feel better soon, old bean.
Well, as I say,
Binary Surfer chiming in saying, "Evening, Britisher. I see the assassins have failed."
Yes, yeah, it's
Is that really
none
why?
None of their bullets seemed to manage to penetrate the fence for some reason.
Is this why you've actually got more of a pep in your step? You've been murdering assassins all week.
It could be that, perhaps it's the joy from garrotting people sent forth by pathetic right-wingers.
So, Architect of Fate says the BBC is state-funded propaganda. What makes it strange is the BBC is anti-nationalist, a propaganda outfit trying to destroy itself. Well, no, I don't think it's trying to destroy itself. I think it would be very much in favour of a larger, more left-wing government that would then propose a larger budget for itself.
I think it's perhaps a little misleading to sort of talk of state-funded propaganda. I mean, for one, it's not really state-funded. We know that really the television license fee is a kind of tax.
The state forces you to pay it, but
yes,
it doesn't,
precisely.
It doesn't make you.
And at the same time, it's misleading to say it's state-funded propaganda, because it kind of gives you the impression of, like in North Korea, where they sort of tell you about the glorious leader who has done this, and the glorious leader who has done that, and the glorious nation's people's government that has done the other. That's not how it works. They're not telling us how wonderful the Conservatives are right now who are in government. Instead, it seems to be more a sort of established view. It's a world view that is kind of sort of set in the BBC, and we're kind of force-fed that, whether we want to or not.
Yeah.
I mean, the most telling thing, I think, is actually, to get away from just stuff that is political and whatever. Just look at sports reporting. So they will tell you about the football results, and they will tell you about the rugby results, and then they'll always try, if there's been any match at all, they will then try and sneak in some women's rugby and women's football or women's cricket during the summer.
Right.
Because, well, they've reported on the men, so they also have to report on the women.
Yeah.
And you see the actual venue where the men are playing rugby and whatever. It's sold out to the raft, tens of thousands of people cheering. And then you see the women, and, well, aside perhaps from their immediate relatives, nobody else there. But the BBC still feel compelled to show us this. And some time ago,
you talked to me about women's sport, because this is one of the areas which we disagree quite dramatically.
I mean, some time ago, they even made a trailer in which they said that this year they intend to show more, to report on more women's sport than ever before. And you just go, no, I'm sorry. It first comes the public demand, then comes the coverage, not the other way around.
Well, to a degree, I can sympathise with them in sense of, I think the exposure will do them well. Given that you said, I don't like women's football in particular because I feel I could take them on. Right? You felt that if
not today, I wish to clarify.
No. But yes. Like in your prime, shall we say, that you could take them on. And I do think that it's important to get the exposure to allow them to train up to the point where they can be elite athletes, because in their own field, because when they are basically having to juggle part-time work and that sort of thing, like, I'm not saying that they should have equalised pay, right, off the bat. I'm saying that they should be given a fighting chance, and I don't think there's a problem. Everyone that I've spoken to who has, the Women's World Cup, which came on, everyone I've spoken to who is not politically motivated or of a certain generation, shall we say, said that they very much enjoyed the Women's World Cup, and everyone just seemed to be watching it this year, and actually they all got kind of into it. So
well,
I don't have a problem.
I must reply to that.
Go on.
And that is, when you say they can effectively, if you give them the exposure, they can become better. I'm sure one could say the same thing about the National Tiddlywinks Championship. If you give them national exposure and you expose them to millions of people on television.
Yes, but international men's Tiddlywinks is not a tried and tested sporting event, whereas international men's football is.
Well, international men's football is, yes, but women's football is not. And the thing is that once they start attracting large audiences, then I see no problem with it being reported on television. But if they don't attract large audiences, why are you putting them above the National Tiddlywinks Championship? Because if they're attracting as many viewers, if they're actually attracting to their own events as many viewers as that, then they have no greater right than, I don't know, the Scrabble Championship or the National Bridge Tournament or something like that. They don't. Once they start packing tens of thousands of people into stadia, then I am the first one to say, yes, then it's in the public interest, and then, just as the men, they should be reported. But one is reporting on them, and the reporting itself is a sort of act of promotion.
Yes.
And that's not why men's football is reported. It isn't in order to promote the men's game. It's first the game establishes itself, then it gets reported on. If these people haven't established themselves, the media owes them nothing.
Very well. I think we'll have to agree to disagree.
We'll have to agree that you're wrong and I'm right. Yes, let's move on.
You could agree that, and I'll agree to disagree. But I can see that we've been joined by a tailed feature. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. How are we?
Oh, not too bad. Although, don't ask the Britisher how he is. He'll go off on one about how his nasal drip is going backwards.
Well, all I can say is that I have some demands. I think that Tailed Feature owes us an explanation on the, how shall we say, the excesses of the blood donor scheme in Scotland.
Well, I have nothing to do with the running of Donate Blood Scotland, so...
But do you know approximately how many pints of blood go into Tunnock's tea cakes?
Yes. What is the productivity factor? I mean, how many Tunnock's tea cakes are handed out per pint of blood?
Well, as you know, you give an armful of blood. And yeah, you in return you get
an armful of Tunnock's tea cakes.
Hancock lives on, doesn't he? Yes,
exactly. I thought you'd appreciate that one, Britisher.
Oh, very much so. Yeah, I'm very proud of you there.
Amazing.
Somebody still knows the old masters.
Exactly. Yes. So yeah,
not so obvious. Of course, has absolutely no idea what we're talking about there, right?
I tell you what, I will say nothing.
Are you familiar with Hancock's Half Hour?
No.
I rest my case. Just look it up on YouTube. I'm sure there must be stuff. Hancock's Half Hour. It's a legendary comedy program. It's still in old black and white. It's got Sid James in it as his sidekick, who then went on to do Carry On. It's marvelous.
How about no?
Well, then you would miss some really good stuff. That Tailed Feature is referring to perhaps his most famous sketch, where he goes to give blood.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's definitely worth seeing.
Very nice.
But yes, back to the Barnett formula and Scotland wasting the nation's wealth on handing out Tunnock's tea cakes willy-nilly to anybody who's prepared to give a few droplets of blood.
I don't know what you want me to say, Britisher, other than haha, sucks to be you.
I tell you what,
you could always just jump on a train and
or you could just jump in front of one. By
the way, today something occurred to me. Is Iron Brew a sham?
What do you mean?
Is it actually just original Lucozade rebottled?
The greatest. What's the bloody word?
Conspiracy.
Yeah, the greatest conspiracy ever pulled, or
yeah. See, I could see Tailed Feature doing an investigative piece on this.
Well, now that
I'm sure, just color-wise, those two liquids look suspiciously the same.
Well, now that Panorama has lost all credibility, there is an opening in the market.
The only difference is that Iron Brew has rust in it.
Rust.
I wouldn't know. I mean, how do we know?
Oh, their advertising slogan used to be "Made in Scotland from girders."
And a single
So they just
single
had
drop.
Someone scraping down the Forth Bridge once in a while, did they?
Don't forget,
Yes.
for every 500 ml, there is also a drop of Tunnock's jam inside.
Ooh, jam in a Tunnock's tea cake.
Yes. So I've completely lost track about what we were talking about, even in the first place. For goodness sake. So
Well, we were talking nasal drippings and then Tunnock's tea cake. So.
You see, then I get away from nasal drip, and we talk about girders and Tunnock's tea cakes and blood donors and Hancocks, and then he complains.
And other
He wants to go back to the post-nasal drip.
In other various red liquids, yes. I'm going to pour petrol in your jar tonight, Britisher. I just want you to know, and then you really will be breathing it. The Sora Sapien says, just switched from supermarkets to my local butcher. Better taste, better value. Now I am so thrifty that a week's worth of food will cost me £5 to £6. Sora Sapien has been barraging me for the last 2 weeks with his belief that students can live on £10 a week, which is entirely possible, of course. But he just seems to want to mention at every moment how he's torturing himself, because as far as I'm aware, it's not that he has to be on £5 to £6 a week, or that that's particularly nutritious. It's just that he can.
So what do you live on for £5 a week then?
Let me see if I can.
I mean, is it kind of oats and cabbage or?
I was going to say, he sounds like an honorary Scot to me.
So here are the basic prices from Tesco of things. Bread, 65p. Milk, 65p for a pint or 85p for two. Butter, own brand salted, £1.80. 1 brown onion, 25p. 6 eggs, £1.5. Essential luxuries being baked beans and tinned soups for 75p each per pack of 4 and 70p for a pack of 2, respectively. And 1 pack of shortbread own brand as another luxury. And so on.
Well, Mister
Definitely honorary Scot.
Up yours in the chat has immediately brought forward the proposition of haggis. I mean, is there a cheap own brand haggis available in Scotland to
You get tinned haggis. I can't remember what
God.
It's like tinned English.
Called.
It's like tinned English breakfasts, isn't it? That you can get and those sorts of things. But it's
you actually get a tin of haggis, neeps, and tatties.
What? Okay, what are neeps? Neeps? Whatever that is. Nips.
Turnips.
Oh, turnips. Can't remember the last time I had a turnip.
It's all slang with those people, isn't it?
Well, at least I understood what tatties were. You know, there is that.
Well, the neeps the word neep comes from the Bulgarian.
Of course it does.
Of course, yes.
It makes perfect sense. Haggis is already cheap, though, and delicious, by the way. So, haggis is... I need to get some more, actually.
You have eaten haggis.
Yes, many times.
To me, the look is enough.
I had haggis wraps, of all things.
Haggis wraps.
So middle class.
Haggis, potato, and lettuce in a wrap, and that was my haggis wrap. It was great.
Okay, I'm proud of you. But no, to me, just the look of it is just enough to just go, no.
That's why you put it in a wrap, so you don't have to look at it. In much the same.
You need to camouflage it. Yes.
You have to remember as well that I did subsist for various periods of time through my life on ration packs from the British military, some of which were 22 years out of date, but were still good. And what you do
did any of them contain haggis?
Not as far as I'm aware, but they were suitably of the consistency where you boil it in the bag and then you definitely do not look where you're putting your spoon, and you hope that it goes into the bag when you're eating it.
Yes, I like that. Yes.
Everything except the rice for the curry, which was the only thing that was palatable to look at. You also had some great stuff in ration packs, like there were 2 types of pudding, right? So unless you were lucky enough to get something with custard, you would have either a chocolate brownie, which came with some sort of horrible chocolate custard, which tasted like neither, or you would get a syrup sponge pudding, which came in, as far as I could tell, molten gold. So, and that's including the flavour, sulphur and death. the general the block of actual pudding in the middle was a square of a thing that was so dense that unless it had been heated to approximately the surface temperature of the sun, it wasn't going to move anywhere. Just pure stodge in a bag. And of course, when it came to the syrup sponge pudding, you had the unfortunate problem that whatever you put into the bag to scoop out the syrup and put it on the to try and thaw the block in the middle, you had to do it quickly in case your spoon melted on the way down.
Okay. Yep.
I am exaggerating a little
sense.
bit, but when it came to the chocolate thing, if you'd managed to smash up the block of the brick that they had in the middle there, then you could be reasonably happy, presuming that you didn't like the taste of chocolate, had never consumed chocolate, and didn't know what it tasted like, and you were happy to lose a few teeth. That's ration bags for you. But otherwise, the general meals were actually quite tasty, provided you didn't look at the sick you were eating.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah. No, I'm seeing the tailed feature is assuring Billy Blogs that there is no meat in haggis. But isn't there offal in haggis?
There's no meat though.
Yes, but I mean there is some
offcuts
there
and
is
organ
something
meat.
of an animal.
Yes.
There
is animal product in it, yes.
Wrapped in the purest stomach lining.
Exactly. It is the heart, lungs, and liver of a sheep boiled in its own stomach.
Marvellous.
So all the goodness is what you're saying.
Vitamin rich.
But actually, it's mostly oats and suet.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. It's particularly the suet that really sounds appealing.
I'll tell you what I do need to eat soon, actually, is a good suet pudding or a steak and kidney pudding. It's I haven't had one in so long. It's very middle class of me, I know, but that's what I need to do. What were we talking again? Oh, yes, supermarkets, local butchery, cheap food. You'll notice as well on Sora Sapiens' list there was absolutely no vegetables of any description. So it's just beans on toast, a bit of butchered meat, and what do we have here?
Wasn't there that sort of I remember this from QI.
A single brown onion. Sorry,
there was a incident, I think somewhere in Canada or whatever, where they had these, the trappers who sort of lived out in the wild, in sort of a camp, and obviously, got the furs in. And at some point, I think there was some camp where everybody was found dead.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out they'd all starved to death, even though they'd been happily eating.
What had they been eating?
They'd been eating rabbit.
Oh, yes, and rabbit's actually remarkably bad nutritional value.
And it was kind of, it was sort of pointed out, look, if they had eaten anything else with the rabbits, they would have been fine. But the fact that they pretty much consumed nothing but a rabbit.
The rabbit is basically the ultimate fuck you from the rabbit population as well, which is we're little hopping, running, dinner-sized portions of ourselves. But also, if you eat us, you're going to die.
Well, I think it's the fact that if you eat nothing but rabbit, if you eat it to the exclusion of all else.
Oh, yes.
So
if you don't mind scurvy.
Yeah, these trappers just must have gone, sort of, the more rabbit they ate, the hungrier they got. The hungrier they got, the more rabbit they ate, and eventually they all starved to death and couldn't work out why.
If only one of them had picked up some spring onions,
Well, I think there was wasn't there also something about cans, the early cans, but this wasn't with the trappers, but this was some other incident. I think it was some Arctic exploration, sort of somewhere in North Canada or whatever. Mm-hmm. And they took sort of the earliest forms of cans with them. And back in those days, the cans were sealed with lead.
Oh God!
And yeah, that's what did for them. And apparently, this particular expedition, one found these folks all over the place. So much so that one kind of realized that some of them seemed to have just wandered off into the wilderness pulling a sledge or something like that. So they seem to have been in such a state of mental confusion that what they were doing was just no longer rational. And yes, one then kind of worked out it must have been the lead. So that was one of the sort of aha moments, I believe, when mankind began to realize lead is perhaps not that good for you.
Great for radioactive shielding. Unfortunately, not that digestible.
Talking of radioactive shielding, one actually thinks that it was the radioactivity from Röntgen that did in, from X-rays, that did in Marie Curie, and not her research into radium.
Oh, really?
Yes, because one some years ago, one unearthed her, one disinterred her from the graveyard in order to inter her in the Pantheon in Paris. And when they did that, they took some earth samples from her grave to test the traces of radioactivity. And it didn't show the traces that were required to be from radium. And instead, one therefore concluded, in the First World War, she volunteered as a nurse, and she was there doing a lot of X-rays of soldiers with broken bones and whatever. And obviously, in those days, they didn't believe in shielding.
No, they didn't. Well,
Radioactive dose after radioactive dose, and one believes that eventually did her.
There we go. The Adam Morgan's donated $2. Says another vehicle has made a hate crime in Portland. Have a look. See. Oh yes, this is the young Antifa activist Sean Keeleher, who basically he was 23. He died on Saturday being hit by an SUV. Basically just got hit by a car. There was evidence of gunfire into the vehicle as well. So that's interesting. I don't know anything really about what's going on in Portland, aside from the fact that Antifa is at war with Patriot Prayer, and has been for many years. But that's about it. Anything from you, Britisher?
Well, all I've heard is, Andy No put out a tweet in which he basically said, he didn't know this chap as a particularly nice man, as somebody who was threatening journalists, and he had a video clip of what is apparently this guy kind of, I would assume telling him to get lost or he'll break his camera or whatever. That was immediately then interpreted as Andy No says this man deserved to be murdered.
Oh.
And you just go, well, no, that was not at all what the chap was actually saying.
Well, I can see here that in the wonderful Oregon Live, whatever that is, that this has all been treated very neutrally by the media. It's like Keeleher was a self-described anarchist and a leader in a tight-knit community of grassroots activists. Sounds quite pleasant, doesn't it?
Yes.
Teresa Rayford, a friend of him, and a Portland activist, another Antifa member, described him as a dedicated social justice community organizer, an educator, and an ally who was outspoken against racism, discrimination, and inequality.
Sounds like a future president. Wasn't Obama a community organizer?
He did a lot of the work we should be doing, Rayford said. He was too young to be killed and to die in Portland. Keeleher, who was also known in the activist community as Antio or Armenio, was an activist for most of his life, always willing to pour his energy towards social justice, a young man bearing the burden of social issues. Now, I am sorry that he is dead. Do not believe for a second that this particular run-up of his personality is in any way accurate to his actions.
Yes, this does sound a little weighted, doesn't it?
Let me see. A friend of his said, at my first protest I ever held, a young anarchist came up to me and offered to be my security. He stuck me by my side for a week and never left. Portland's Resistance. PDX Resistance. They have a website that sprang up immediately following Donald Trump's election. Let me see. It's called A Beacon of Light. That is what it says on their website. In order to survive the Trump presidency...
Yep.
The rise of white nationalism and widening income inequality, there needs to be a strong resistance. We want to, all this
Yeah,
stuff.
did you hear about the the Democrat presidential candidates CNN organized equality town hall meet?
No, go on.
Oh my God! It's I think right at the beginning, before they even try to do anything, some transgendered people, let's put it like that, decided to protest. It was just one sort of extreme after the other. At one point, there was a black transgendered person grabbing the microphone of a mother and her. Was it actually a son or a daughter? These days it's confusing, but grabbing the microphone off them with the sentence, "I don't want to take your microphone, but."
Mm-hmm.
And then proceeded to shout at the audience what for a extraordinary black trans woman he or she is. And then there was the Chris Cuomo moment,
Right.
which at first I really just thought, oh, this is nothing. Why are people making a fuss of this? And then he made a fuss of it, and that's when it became. So Kamala Harris came on, and as she came on, she decided, because of the nature of the meeting, to announce her pronouns.
Oh, of course you did, yep.
So my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And Chris Cuomo, obviously just in the heat of the moment, kind of said, "Oh, mine too." Now it was obvious what he actually meant.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I mean? So, okay, he misspoke. It doesn't really matter, So I wasn't about to include that in the week that was or whatever.
I have pronouns too.
And just mock him for kind of going agreeing to those pronouns or whatever. But what then happened was he then tweeted, "Oh, I am so sorry. I apologize. I shouldn't have done this." And you just go, "What?"
You should
So you misspoke, and now you're pretty much publicly prostrating yourself before this minority.
The great tears streaming down his face as he's racked with guilt at night, as he cannot sleep, as he rolls around sweating profusely in his bed, going, "Why?
Yeah, just his conscience can't bear it.
Yeah,
and that was one of those moments where you just sort of, what? He's apologizing? So obviously some people on the right were mocking him for, oh well, he's a she now or whatever. But it was clearly he had just misspoken. And given how much pressure you must be under if you're hosting a live television program where people are taking microphones and shouting and whatever, you can see why something like that could arise.
Mm.
But then to come out on Twitter, please read. I said this, I shouldn't have done. I apologize. I want to be an ally. I am in support of this cause. And you just go, good God. It really is that bad by now that the people must literally grovel.
I did take great pleasure the other day in I was sitting down having some drinks, and a campaigner for the organisation Stonewall. You familiar?
Mm-hmm. Yes, Peter Tatchell.
Yes, and that wasn't who sat down with me, but a campaigner for Stonewall.
Yes, but he's the most famous figure of Stonewall. Yes.
But so she came and sat down, and was going on about how everyone needs to be an ally. We're eventually going to move towards our new world order, changing the world. Genuinely said changing the world and new world order, and that. Eventually, of course, we want everyone to introduce themselves using their pronouns, and everyone will be referred to as they, them. We will move to a purely neutral system with no identifiers whatsoever. I thought, what a grey world. And they said, and we hope to help make people allies. I know all of you are allies. And I just had to perk up and just say, there is no way on God's good earth that I am your ally. And I'd had a few at that point, so hence the flowery language. Mm-hmm. But it was worth it just for the look on their face. It was just the look on her face of utter just surprise because
I couldn't help myself there where you said New World Order. There was just an image that sprung to mind.
Go on.
Are you familiar with the video True Faith by New Order?
No, do tell.
Oh, the song, but not the video.
Yeah, I mean, it's perhaps one of the most well-known from the 80s. It was. I think the band themselves were somewhat taken aback when this kind of pretentious French director turned up to do a video for them. But in all fairness, he did pull it off. He created something that was visually very different. You know, you remember it once you've seen it. And in it, you've got these kind of mimes dressed in strange costumes, jumping up and down in the rhythm to the song and whatever. But in a lot of the scenes, they're kind of hitting each other to the rhythm of the music. And therefore, when you were kind of talking about Stonewall telling us about the New World Order, I couldn't help but imagine these mimes smacking each other.
You have a strange mind, Britisher. It's why I keep you around.
You see this guy that's got that said "me too" at the end of the about the pronouns.
Oh, yeah,
I think it'd be better.
Cuomo,
As long as he doesn't say
better.
#me too.
That's something different entirely. But it would have been even better, I think, if he had just doubled down and went, "Yeah, no, they are my pronouns, and everyone must refer to me as she from now on."
It's like he goes home to his wife. So, why am I supposed to call you a woman now? Oh, I'm not a woman. I merely am appropriating their pronouns because I had a small media fuck up, shall we say?
Well, yes. I mean, in all fairness, why couldn't you claim that you identify as a man? Your pronouns are she, her, and hers. I mean, that would really mess with the system, wouldn't it?
I doubt it. I think they would embrace it, judging by the people I've spoken to, and they just go, yeah.
You know, if men can have periods, why can men not be referred to as she, her, and hers?
I mean, do whatever you do. Do whatever you want, Britisher. I mean, you can be referred to as whatever it was you were telling me the other day. My royal.
The great time-traveling god.
Yes, something along those lines.
Yes, yeah.
Your Royal Highness, yeah. Your Royal Brainness, anyway.
Yes, the last white Raj of Sarawak. Look it up. There was such a thing. The white Rajas of Sarawak existed.
I'm sure they were Britisher.
They're more than likely
sounds like a band.
It does.
They're more than likely the least politically correct thing ever.
And next up, the White Raj of, what was it?
Sarawak.
The White Raj of Sarawak, followed by Chocolate Homunculus. Yes, it's...
Well, Sarawak, I believe, these days it's a kind of province in, is it Malaysia or Indonesia? And back in the day, this is to anybody who reads Flashman or takes any interest in Victorian history, there was some British adventurers who started out from Hong Kong, and they seem to have some agreement with the Sultan of Brunei. And Sarawak was entirely infested by pirates. So, obviously they were a menace to shipping, but they were also a menace to the local population. So these chaps managed to defeat the pirates. And in turn, the Sultan of Brunei, who nominally was in charge of that area, but because it was in the hands of the pirates, then ceded it to them. So then for several generations, the white Rajas of Sarawak ruled Sarawak. So hence I say it's perhaps the least politically correct form of government you could possibly imagine.
There you go.
But actually, apparently they were quite popular in their day because obviously they brought some semblance of law and order.
And everyone was shit scared of them, yep. So Cisco responded to you, Britisher, some time ago, but we finally got around.
So what is he wrong about now?
He says, I declare Britisher to be a nithing.
A nithing?
A nithing.
This is no doubt some sort of Danish expression, isn't it?
Complete with a bizarre Danish spelling, with what looks like a small aircraft's flight path to be the letter. So There's that, but you're a nithing apparently, which
So I'm a nithing which is incorporated into a small air flight path.
a
These
nithing
games are getting ever more surreal, aren't they?
a nithing pole in Old Norse, sometimes normalized as nithstang or nidstang, was a pole which was used for cursing an enemy in Germanic pagan tradition.
Well, that's one thing. For a moment there, I thought this was going in some kind of pole dancing direction. So instead, it's got something to do with a curse. I can live with that.
There you go. You're cursed, Britisher, or you're used to curse people. So there's that. Object of Hate has some more wholesome advice for you and says, Hal's Ultra Black Package will relieve the throat. So there you go.
Hal's
That sounds really
Ultra-Black
kinky. I think Object of Hate meant halls.
Yeah, this sounds like some kind of
Halls.
euphemism. Ultra black package.
It really does. Especially when you spell halls wrong and it comes out as Hals.
Oh,
Yeah. I think Count Dankula would have quite a lot of fun with the ultra black package, with that expression, wouldn't he? I think he and his chat would take that to new heights.
Well, of course, but naturally we have.
Whereas ours are much more well behaved.
I was going to say we have a wonderful audience of well-behaved, polite, and generous patrons.
Yeah, except for the odd dames.
Apart from the odd Dane, so there is
Who
that.
think I'm a nithing, whatever that is.
The Harry channel donated $10. Thank you very much through Streamlabs. So thank you very much for that as well. And says the Great British Bake Off. Oh, going back some now. Is insanely wholesome. They tried to make an American version, but it was terrible because the contestants engaged in braggadocio and drama. Lots of Americans watched the British version on Netflix instead.
Well, yeah, you can't really make pancakes and shout yeehaw, can you?
No, but you can cause a lot of drama to the point where you just got to get Gordon Ramsay shaking his head in disbelief. That could happen.
Well, I think in that case they perhaps should do sort of an Italian version of the Great Italian Bake Off and set it to opera or something.
They said the Italians never deviate from the recipe, as I was informed by the Italians in my
Yes,
household.
of course, yes. Yes, there was that wonderful clip, yes.
JD says apparently those letters are called thorns in knitting. There you go, and they do look a bit thorny, so there you go. Thank you for that, Harry Channel. Harry,
can I just ask, given that you're talking about thorns, because there is this thing in Scandinavian languages. Now, I don't know if it applies to all of them, whether the Norwegians, the Danes, and the Swedes all do it.
Mm-hmm.
But there are sort of these various accents that are put on letters. And I just want, for example, they've got like an O with a line through it, a diagonal line.
Yeah.
And I just wonder whether perhaps some of our Scandinavian viewers could explain what the hell is going on. So I'm familiar with the German umlauts, with an A or an O or a U with two dots on it. Now, I believe the Scandinavians do something similar, but I don't know whether they do it with the same result.
Well,
I'd be keen to know whether the Scandinavians in the audience can let us know what on earth some of those umlauts, that they seem to have actually are and what they do to the lettering.
Well, I encourage you, Britisher.
There's a channel. There's a challenge.
I encourage you, Britisher, then to pay attention to the chat, who will, I have no doubt, provide you with a wide variety of different letters. The Harry Channel says there is an Italian bake-off. Clearly, you bigot Britisher, not knowing that there's an Italian bake-off.
Di bake-offio di Italiano.
I'm sorry, I don't speak French. The that was bad even by my standards. Okay. So Harry Engledive has donated £5, says Tailed not making a similar entrance to his entrance on Laughing at the Guardian? Tailed.
I
mean, yes, you just kind of slunk in and waited for an opening.
Like I didn't do that on his stream.
Like the Scottish dog you are. I mean, what? Go on. What? How did you entrance in Laughing at the Guardian, which is a blatant shill for his own show, I might add. Go on.
Well, he'd already been going for I don't know, a couple of hours or something like that. It was just him and Discordia. So I just jumped in and then said the word nigger about 20 times.
Oh, thanks for demonetizing this already demonetized stream.
Exactly.
This of course was nothing else but a reference to the name of the dog in the Dam Busters movie.
Exactly.
Yes, he was reading the same page over and over again, and he just got stuck on the same word. Just was trying to make sure it was well pronounced.
I was lagging.
Like a gramophone caught on repeat, you know. The Drunk Shovel says the joys of MREs. That'd be what's that? Meals ready to eat. That's the ration pack. So thank you for referencing that. Yeah, I tend to find that as long as you got the chicken and herb dumplings ones, then you could use the bread as a pillow, the dumplings as a pillow if you couldn't consume them at the time. So it was always good. Mighty Balzac says those black trans women were so sassy. Were they sassy, Britisher?
It's one word for them. I would just basically. I didn't really see them all. I didn't see the cabal. I just saw the one. And loud is what I would call that particular person.
JS says Cuomo is the son of the ex-governor of New York. And his brother is the current governor of New York. It seems to be a family tradition there. I assume he's talking about, was it Chris Cuomo?
Yes.
Is that right? Yes. And his brother Andrew Cuomo.
Well, he got into
Perry Cuomo.
He got into trouble recently, didn't he? When someone referred to him as Fredo.
Oh yes, Fredo.
Which basically is the brother in The Godfather who is useless.
I'm so glad that you explained that.
He didn't take well to that.
Let me see. Oh yes, he. So on August 13th, 2019, in Shelter Island, New York, Cuomo threatened to throw a heckler down a flight of stairs at a bar, chastising him with profanity-laced insults after the man called him Fredo, in reference to The Godfather, the character from The Godfather. Cuomo told the man that the use of the name Fredo was tantamount to using the N-word to Italian Americans, causing debate
Which
on Twitter.
no Italian American had ever heard of when they were asked afterwards.
Yeah. And that was that. Acknowledging, he addressed the incident publicly, acknowledging he should be better than what he opposes. Of course. Fake news Frodo. People should call him Frodo. That's what should be done. Amazing. And last but not least, Dr. Martin Luther Pepe says, I agree, the Danes are southern filth. I think
Dr. Martin Luther Pepe, is he one of our Finnish guests?
Dr. Martin Luther Pepe lives in many places, but
I just know we have previously had rivalries.
Well, we once did see a super chatting war between the venerable Doctor and Scowen, which was probably broken off because neither of them could afford to continue.
Was it Martin Luther Pepe, or was it the true King of Finland, or whatever?
Oh, there was the true King of Finland was someone else, but I don't know offhand. That's a long way back from my memory.
I always find it funny with Finland that they had an air force that had a swastika on their air, as the insignia. They had a pale blue swastika on their aircraft.
Right.
Because I think the first plane that their air force ever had was donated to them by a rich Swede. And it just so happened that Swedish family's insignia was a swastika.
Yes, relating to, was it Hinduism?
So they used the swastika then as their insignia for their air force.
Mm.
That was until sort of after the Second World War when it became a bit embarrassing.
When it became considered to be in rather bad taste, yes. We have that. The last story of this evening, then, is about voter ID, of all things. So what do we make of the trial run that was done in 2000 and let me see where it is 2019 in local elections, I think, during a pilot study in 10 areas.
So this year.
Yeah. In 10 areas of England, 2,000 people were turned away at polling stations because they did not carry ID. 750 of these people did not subsequently return with ID to cast their ballot, representing less than 1% of voters in the pilot areas, which I think is a far... it does reference the fact that most people have ID, most people use ID. There was a couple of stories which were saying, it's a travesty, 750 people were denied their right to vote.
Well, one has to be careful with something like that, because, of course, that was a local election.
Yeah.
And barely anybody turns out for a local election. But when it comes for a general election, there would be a much larger percentage of the population that would turn out.
Yeah, the Electoral Commission reckons 7.5% of the electorate do not have access to approved voter ID.
I mean, I saw, I sort of once intervened in some sort of exchange on Twitter in this, in which someone would say, "Oh, this is just election rigging," and I sort of said, "Well, no, it's not really. It's the collision of two priorities. One is you want as many people to be able to vote as possible, but the next one is you also want to make it secure and fraud proof. And therefore, whatever sort of decision you take, it will be not an ideal solution, because it will clearly impinge on the other."
Well, the current idea is to have voter ID offer a free way to obtain a photographic ID, and but it's not an ID. It's not like the ID card system where everyone must carry an ID card at all times. It's just a case of if you don't have access to a driving license, passport, or other system, then you can apply for this card, get it posted to you, and that'll be that.
Well, I mean, it sounds like easy enough a solution. How practical it then really turns out to be. I mean, we always hear about lots of people who end up not registered to vote and whatever.
I mean, you're missing the biggest problem, which I'm surprised you haven't pulled up, which is that at the moment, due to the way the system works, we have postal votes. Mm-hmm. How do postal votes work when you have to show ID? It doesn't work.
Yeah, good point. As such, I am, surprise, surprise, I'm somewhat on the fence here.
You Britisher on the fence? Surely not.
To me, it really depends on how big the problem of fraud has been shown to be. Mm-hmm. If it's merely a matter of trying to avoid some hypothetical fraud, then I would say this is more than likely a bad idea. If, however, there have been serious incidents, so basically, if we know that this is a problem, this is a growing problem, then I would say by all means introduce it.
But it's hard to track at the moment, isn't it? Because, so we have in 2017, there were 336 cases of reported cases, I should say, of electoral fraud. Most of which had no action taken. 1 report resulted in a conviction, 8 resulted in cautions. But the question is that 336 representative, given that we don't ask for ID on the door? You can just...
Well, yes, but I think it's a matter of, what sort of flavour are we getting? I mean, I think in a lot of cases, where there are some allegations, it's very much when sort of people have entire households vote via postal votes or things like that.
Yeah,
I think if you know what you're looking for, you more than like can identify problems quite easily, if you know what I mean. Yeah. The question is, has this been looked into at all? Or is one? This is what I mean. Is one solving a hypothetical problem here, or is it a real problem?
Well, that's the question. But it also comes with the connotations which we already have at the moment of the EU pushing to allow any EU citizen to vote in the local elections of wherever they happen to be resident, right, without being a citizen. And if the Brexit process continues to drag on and on and on and on, God knows what will be pushed through.
Well, I mean, the EU citizens, they would be the people with the least problem.
Yeah,
because being foreigners, they would have ID.
I mean, you say that, but then you have things like the Brexit referendum versus the EU elections, where obviously in EU elections, European citizens can vote, but if suddenly they're all allowed to take part in a national referendum, then what happens is that they can skew the vote in favour of people with foreign interests.
Yes, yeah, and it's quite obvious what the position of the overwhelming majority of foreigners, or should we say of European foreigners, would be in a EU referendum.
Especially given,
Yeah, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, even the idea of voting in local elections for foreigners, to me, is just ridiculous. I really think citizenship must mean something.
Objective, yeah.
And I really sort of I kind of wonder what is the theoretical meaning of citizenship supposed to be if people without citizenship are supposed to be allowed to vote. I just don't get it.
Yeah, the privileges of the citizen are something which needs to be safeguarded. Object of Hate is asking, how do you distinguish between citizens and non-citizens in UK elections without ID? You go on the electoral register, which is basically a list of who is eligible to vote. You get a voting card which says you've been added to your local area. You register for the area you're going to vote in. You get a card which says you've been registered, and then you can go down and you're the name on the list. But no one checks whether or not you are the person you say you are.
Actually, there's one little anecdote that I remember. This goes way back. I mean, this is this is well over 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this chap who he was in London at the time. He was in some sort of temporarily rented flat, so short-term lease. And the door knocked, and there was a very, very keen local authority worker of some sort, and the local authority was having a push of trying to register voters, and here they were trying to register him, and he kind of looked sort of completely bemused, as in, you do realise I'm not British. At which their face fell, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But yes, they were halfway to registering him at the time. Now, of course, these are dare I say it, the olden days. When one still used pen and paper, and they didn't turn up with some iPad or whatever.
Yeah.
So things were perhaps a little more creaky back then. But yes, he said, had he not stopped them,
then
he would have been registered.
Yeah.
Yes.
Have you not seen the way elections are supposed to run in Blackadder? Pitt the Younger?
Yes, I did. I did get the clear instructions as to how it's supposed to work. Yes.
For those who don't know, there's a great scene where only one person is eligible to vote, and that's Blackadder, and only one person is registered to count the votes, and that's Blackadder. And so on. So there you go. That's quite amusing. Drunk Shovel says, something given has no value. I mean, we're given citizenship at birth if you're of the nation that you're from, but it has value in that it's not extended to everyone. No so-called citizens of the world. There's no world citizenship, and such a thing would be meaningless anyway, because citizen has connotations.
Dare I mention the Romans?
Go ahead.
At some point, under Emperor Caracalla, everyone was made a Roman citizen.
Mm-hmm.
And guess why he did it?
Go on.
Taxation.
Oh, what a surprise. Money! Yeah, go on.
But yes, it was one of those things where people sort of said, well, it was one of those sort of moments where effectively the way that the system had always worked was undermined.
Mm-hmm.
Because as long as the Roman citizen was something special, as long as it had value, it was different than just everybody being made a Roman citizen.
Yeah.
and therefore it was something. It gave the people who were Romans a status.
Yes, there was
The moment you just made everybody a Roman, so basically everybody who was not a slave who lived within the empire was a Roman.
Yeah.
Well, then what you've really done is not made everyone a Roman citizen. You've effectively abolished citizenship.
Yes. When everyone's super, no one will be to...
Precisely. And yeah, so, in his case, yes, it was entirely down for taxation reasons. So he solved his short-term problem, but actually increased the problems of the empire.
Yes, indeed. That doesn't surprise me. Drunk Shovel mentioning in chat that we should earn citizenship. I can see a Heinleinian society emerging in the Fake Accents Unite chat.
Yes, is this one of these kind of warrior fantasies where...
You cut out for a second there, but should I say again?
Is this another one of these warrior fantasies where we're all fighting aliens?
No, I mean, that wasn't the point of a Heinleinian society.
No, I don't know what a Heinleinian society is. But, the suggestion from the chat that you referred to, that basically we all have to serve in order to serve.
Yeah. Heinlein wrote Starship Troopers, which was basically a vehicle for his
well, yes, that's what I'm referring to with warriors fighting aliens.
The idea of finding some form of service that you have to do for...
Yes, I think next to nothing of those ideas.
That doesn't surprise me. I did do a brief rebuttal of Sargon of Akkad's video on that. That's somewhere on the channel. Can't remember when I exactly did it. But
it's when it comes to those sort of things, it all sounds so wonderful on paper, and it all looks so straightforward. But then look to your own heroes and sort of ask yourself whether you really want to see Roger Scruton and Peter Hitchens running around with a rifle.
It's not all military. It includes civil service and that sort of thing. So it's just that there are in the story there are assessors that basically determine a set of options for you for service.
Well, I will. In that case, I will. I would have volunteered in my early 20s to be a civil service librarian for the period.
The only requirement of the service is it is difficult and requires sacrifice. So unfortunately, unless you really hate reading...
I would be willing to sacrifice for my librarianship.
Basically, what you end up with is a load of dyslexic librarians, because that's the people who find being a librarian the most difficult. So that'd be an interesting thing. There are flaws with Heinlein's system, naturally, and also the ways in which we get there. But that is a topic for another day.
The thing is, I actually think, and this will take everybody by surprise, not the fact that I think, but that I think that it is actually just wanton romanticism. Pregnant pause there.
Are you going to qualify qualify the ways in which it's relevant?
Well, it's a sort of a romantic ideal, but it's in reality it would just have the more mundane reality would just have 20,000 young lads polishing shoes in a barracks somewhere. It's
everyone must have a job, therefore we must invent jobs. Someone says?
Well, yeah, but as I say, what I'm talking about is when you think about the military. When we think about the military, we always like to think about the professional army these days. But deprofessionalize the army. Stick a bunch of complete amateurs in there who don't belong there, who have no idea, who have little to no conception of what it means to be a soldier or whatever, because that's what you get when you introduce something like that. And therefore, no doubt nobody in this audience will be familiar with the film On the Fiddle. I think it was Sean Connery's first ever movie, or perhaps his second.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a sort of a fun look, in a way, at British army life during the Second World War, when not regarded from the perspective of storming the beaches or the Battle of Britain or anything like that, but just hanging around in tents, and soldiers just trying to make the time go by. And of course, there always being one guy who's on the fiddle. There's always some guy who's just trying to make a buck. And that's what it would turn into. The idea that you've got Starship Troopers and they're all running around heroically like the SAS fighting something, that's not what it turns out. That's not what it turns out to be. Instead, it's just mundane, pure boredom. Because if you've got some chap who, in future life will turn out to be an accountant, he's not going to be Action Man on the beach.
It doesn't have to choose to be. He could.
If you basically take him in, then you basically have to bring it down to his level. And therefore, then it just it turns into some sort of camping with amateurs.
I won't.
The Scout with an older version of the Scouts.
I won't disagree that it's fantasy Britisher, but I think you're mischaracterizing his argument and his implementation as well. So we both don't think it would be viable, but we for different reasons. Perhaps we'll talk about it again another time, but it is time to come to a close. It is time to end. So I'd like to say thank you very, very much to Tailed Feature for joining us, albeit briefly.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you very much to yourself, Britisher, for regaling us with tales of the Romans and beyond.
Well, yes, I mean, what can I say? Sometimes it's hard to shut up, but I will try.
And there we go. With that, smoke me a kipper. I'll be back for breakfast, or at least next week on Monday. Take care, people.
Okay.
See you about.